The link to the recording is going to be posted to the T-Impact website. It'll also be distributed to all attendees. We're going to put all attendees on mute during throughout the presentation, but there's a Q&A function down at the bottom of your screen. If you look at the toolbar, where you can post any questions. We really want this to be as interactive as we can on a webinar. So if you have any questions, don't wait to the end, start posting them. We've got somebody here on the call that's going to facilitate that for us. So we have a very distinguished group of panelists for you here today. Our speakers are Dean Murphy, Senior Pre-Sales Technical Consultant for UiPath. Dean's helped many UK government and healthcare organizations with their automation journey, particularly in the startup, which we're talking about here. Dean's going to present 3 of UiPath's process discovery tools, 2 of which are in general release, 1 of which is on its way. And these are tools that can help you to unlock the potential within your organization. And I think it's going to be really interesting. He's also going to help you to understand when to use each of the tool and to give you an idea of pricing so you can do those kind of trade-offs in your mind. There's also myself, Keith Stagner. I'm CEO of T-Impact with 30 years experience implementing complex change programs across both commercial and public sector, with a strong bias toward digital transformation and looking at impacts across the entire operation. I'm going to provide insight into how these process discovery tools can be incorporated into your digital transformation, and particularly into your robotic process automation approach. Really helping to eliminate uncertainty and achieve that most difficult thing of getting a decision. Simon Jones is Head of Health, Housing and Communities, responsible for local governments at Cadence Innova. Simon's going to share insight into the real-life challenge of engaging and persuading people to support your program. It's a challenge as old as Tom, and he's going to share with you techniques that date back to 350 BC, so it's really fascinating. We also have on the panel Jane Barrett, one of the founding partners of Cadence Innova, a multi-award-winning management consultancy that specializes in delivering sustainable change with an enduring and positive impact. Paul Hunt with T-Impact, commercial and HR manager. He's going to be hosting our Q&A. And Trevor Cole, head of sales at T-Impact, who will answer any commercial questions. So we've reserved 15 minutes at the end of the presentations for Q&A, but let me ask you again, please ask any questions as soon as they occur to you. Paul will be facilitate those and hand those out in that 15 minutes toward the end. At the end of the webinar, we'll give you a bit more detail about this after the questions, but all attendees will also receive a special offer. Our pre-packaged finance bot offer includes 2 pre-built bots, cloud infrastructure, configuration, and service transition. Basically everything you need to deliver a successful RPA project. So I'm now going to hand over to Dean to start our first presentation.
Thanks, Keith. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for making the time to join this session. I'd like to talk to you about how you and your organization can help to discover processes for automation. Before I do that, I want to set the context of where process discovery fits into an end-to-end automation journey. So you may have heard Gartner talk about a hyper-automation journey, and at UiPath, we've picked up on that because we feel we align nicely to Gartner's vision. So with any journey, though, there's a path that you're going to follow. And on that path, the first thing you're going to start to do is start to discover, qualify, document, measure, and build a business case around the ideas that you want to automate. And so having the right tools to support that is going to be crucial, and that's kind of the essence of this webinar today. And that is very much an iterative activity. If you feel like you've discovered everything, it's probably time to shut up shop and go home, because I think there's always going to be something else to discover, always something else to refine and improve. Of course, you're going to need some infrastructure to run this on. So some of you may be doing that today, but we'll talk about the flexibility we have in a moment. And then, of course, you need to build out those automations. You need to be able to test them. You need to get the users involved in accepting those as well. And then you need to think about the deployment of those. When you're going to go live, is it going to be an attended robot running in the foreground, augmenting the things that people do at their workstation? Is it going to be unattended, running in the background? Or is it going to be hybrid with a human in the loop? So how are you going to achieve that? Of course, when you need to be able to log everything that these digital workers are doing. and then make sense of that through analysis tools. And that analysis can also inform where you go next. Do you go deeper on an existing process, or do you pick off the next one in your automation pipeline? And then there may be some other things on the periphery that you may want to think about. So how do we align to this? Well, we have a number of products in what we call the process discovery area. We have Automation Hub, Task Mining, Process Mining, and Task Capture. We have flexibility around the infrastructure. We have a variety of tools for building automation, whether they're the Studio, the traditional product that we've had for a number of years, Studio X aimed at citizen developers, the less technical users, and Studio Pro aimed really at things like the test automation team. We have test tools in Test Manager to be able to test your automations, to be able to test your other applications that you're putting, maybe going through upgrades. We have the robots that kind of essentially the digital workforce. And we have Action Sense that allows you to have human in the loop without having to throw things over the wall via email, for example. And we have Insights that allow you to kind of build visual dashboards with no coding skills, with kind of no technical experience. And we also have things like document understanding, where we can start to incorporate things like optical character recognition, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and start to embed those into your business process. But today, we're purely going to focus on kind of those elements at the top of the screen there, kind of the four pillars that we have. So starting off with task mining. So right now, this is in private preview, so it's not gone for general availability yet. But what this allows us to do is to essentially move away from the subjective view that organizations have when they start to identify processes for automation. One of the challenges that most organizations face is that they will use business analysts, whether they're internal business analysts or whether you're using services from organizations like T-Impact, to go out into your business to try to discover where those candidates for automation are. And the challenge is that that's a finite resource. You know, you've only got so many business analysts. You can only kind of invest so much in services from external organizations. So UiPath came up with a series of products and tools to facilitate the scaling of that. So task mining is essentially a bit of software that will run on a user's machine, and it will essentially monitor the things that they're doing through their working day. If they're doing any personal things, they can pause that analysis, that monitoring, and then resume it again when they've finished. Maybe they're on their lunch break doing some personal shopping. Then what happens is at the end of the kind of the capture period, we then use artificial intelligence to analyze and make sense of all of that, and then start to make recommendations as to where we've seen repeatability in the things that people are doing. So candidates for automation. So it will provide us with high-level process maps, some key metrics about how quickly that process is being done, how many users were involved in building that picture, number of steps, and also a kind of an automation score. So here we can see we've got a 68% relative RPA score, so a reasonable candidate for automation. But what we're essentially doing is we're discovering these processes for you rather than having to have business analysts going out there doing it. So right now I don't have a demonstration version of task mining, but I do have demonstrations of process mining, Automation Hub, and Task Capture. So I'm going to give you a very quick whistle-stop tour of some of these products. And if anybody's interested in these, then please do let us know, and we can organize some one-on-one deeper dive sessions into them. So they say in film and TV, don't work with animals and children. I extend that to don't work with live technology, but I think that I think working with the actual product really tells a stronger story than just using slide material. So this is our process mining tool. Let me just go back to my start screen. So right now we're looking at some analysis that have been done on in this case, an end-to-end invoice process. We're currently looking at the period of April 2019. So what we've done here is we've taken application logs from Oracle or SAP or other ERP systems, finance systems, and we've imported them into our process mining tool. And as part of that, we've kind of done some massaging of that data to bring it in. And what that allows us to do is start to build a picture of what an end-to-end process looks like. So in this case, we've had 1,708 cases, in this case, 1,708 invoices. We've had almost 10,000 events. And events essentially is a touch point within that end-to-end process where that transaction has had, there's almost 2,000 transactions have had almost 5 touch points each. We've got 10 different activities, so 10 different steps that are involved in an end-to-end process. But we've had 105 different variants, 105 different paths through our process. And this data has come from 165 users. And here we can see the main activities that we have. So receive invoice, process invoice, and so on. We can also look at that from a process map perspective. So here we can see a visualization of our end-to-end process. Now this is kind of the golden thread, the happy path, whatever you choose to call it. So here we can see things like receive invoice, process invoice, final check of invoice, approve invoice, and pay invoice. But within the tool, what we can also do is see whether there may be some peripheral activities. So this slider here allows me to adjust and start to see while some of these go through a contract conditions check. Some of them go through requesting more data. Some of them can fast track through to checked and approved. And as we widen this, we start to see where some of those other activities are. We also have edges as well. So edges are some of the edge cases that some of our transactions go through. And quite often these will be things like iteration loops where we're going around the same activity over and over. And as we widen this out, we really start to see a true picture of our process. Now, trying to get this by interviewing people is going to be almost impossible because different people may have a different role in the end-to-end process, and trying to build that picture through interviews, through trying to capture and document those processes is going to be very challenging. Also, what we do here is we're getting to the truth of what the process looks like. So we're using actual log data, not anecdotal information coming from end users. So we can also look at this from a timing perspective. And this is a very powerful way for us to be able to see where some of our bottlenecks are. So if we look at this from an activities perspective, we can see here, for example, that process invoice in April 2019 took an average of 9 days per transaction to go through that stage of the process. Last month, it was 8 days. So let's just step through and see what happens in May. So what we've done here is we've identified that process invoice is a business bottleneck. So it's taking far too long for our transactions to get through that particular step. So I know that this organization chose to automate or implement an initial automation for this process invoice step. And that went live in June. So if we step forward now to June, we'll see that that process invoice now has been reduced from between 8 and 9 days to 2.8 days in June. So we can start to see and measure the impact that automation has on an end-to-end process. But now we can start to see that final check of invoice is our next business bottleneck. That's the one we may want to tackle next. So let's step through and see, because I think we automated that one around about August. So let's step through to July and see what that process invoice is doing now. So that's gone down now from 8 to 9 days to 2.8 days to 5 hours. So we've improved that automation in this period. So we're starting to see, again, the further improvements that is bringing. But final check of invoice is still a bottleneck. So let's look at the period where we automated that. So final check of invoice has now gone from an average of kind of around about 6 days down to 2.2 days. Well, let's see what our process invoice is doing. We're now down to 17 minutes. So through automation, we've reduced that down from 8 to 9 days to a matter of minutes. And what's powerful about this is not only do we see what our our human workforce is doing, the impact that they have on the end-to-end process, we can start to see what impact the automation has on the end-to-end process as well. We can start to measure the positive impact and the positive results that that's bringing. So that was a very quick introduction to some of the power and some of the flexibility and some of the insight you can gain through process mining. We don't have a great deal of time. I would like to go into this with a lot more detail, but if you want to know more about this, some of the additional capabilities we have within the tool, drilling down to transactional level, seeing where the problem is people, process, or technology. And in this case, it may even be certain suppliers, but the tool allows us to gain that insight. So what I thought I'd do now is move on to something called Automation Hub. So Automation Hub is just let me refresh this, make sure it doesn't require me to log in. Okay, Automation Hub is a tool that allows us to crowdsource ideas from end users. So process mining is a great tool when we're looking at some of the more complex, some of the more kind of monolithic processes we have within our organization. But there may be a number of different kind of smaller activities, more like kind of task type work that people are doing that we wouldn't necessarily invest in process mining to discover that. So Automation Hub allows us to crowdsource ideas, again, creating that capacity within the business analyst team to go out and maybe deal with the more complex processes while we allow end users to submit their own ideas. So here we're looking at my personal instance of Automation Hub, which I use quite often with customers. So I often clean out the data, which is why it's kind of looking a little bit sparse. But here's some samples that I've got in here. So here we've got a couple of healthcare examples. What I thought I'd do is show you what it's like to submit an idea. So what I'd like to show you is a manual process that gets performed today. It's one of expenses, so you may feel it's not overly relevant at the moment, but I'm sure this will come back and we'll enjoy having to do this again. So my scenario here is that we have an expenses application on the right-hand side. This is a licensed application, and we pay per user. And so we have contractors working for us. Those contractors work for us on an infrequent basis. So rather than pay for software license for those guys, we get them to send it in the spreadsheet, and the manual process is to take that, things like the employee number, paste it into this field, click lookup, and then it's supposed to take the first name and last name and put it into this name column. So I have to concatenate those two fields. I'm not going to do it for this demonstration, but so you get a sense of what's happening. Next, I choose the category. So in this case, travel. And enter that, enter the date, and currency is correct, and enter the net amount. And finally, click submit. And then I'll click the clear button just to clear out my form. So that's a manual process that I'd like to submit as an idea for automation. So let's go ahead and do this. So I'm going to go for the submit idea. And here are two options, employee driven or center of excellence driven. It's the same questions, it's just in the center of excellence. Well, we ask them all up front, but let me go into the employee driven. It says, do you need to know more about process automation on the left-hand side? Hopefully, given I'm presenting this, I know enough, so let's go ahead and get started. And now it asks me a series of 9 questions. So let's kind of whip through these quite quickly. I would say an automation to enter contractor expenses. And click next. Now give it a title. So let's call this contractor expenses. So we've got a very simple set of 9 questions, and help us to where does this automation fit within our organizational hierarchy. So this is fully configurable. So in my case, it fits under finance and accounting. It fits under record to report, general accounting, and here we have an expense recording at the bottom. So again, all those levels are fully configurable to you and your organization. Next is saying how rules-based is my task. From very creative all the way through to very rules-based. Well, mine is very rules-based. If I'm missing any information, I'll send it back to the contractor. And I can choose to enter a comment here. For the purpose of demonstration, I don't think you need to see me type any more than is painfully necessary. Click next. Next, how I describe the input data for my task or process. So what we're doing here is we've got a series of questions that are getting consistency in how we're capturing and qualifying and assessing our automation idea. So on the left-hand side, very much paper-based, all the way through to very much digital. Well, mine's very much digital. I always receive it in that Excel format. And click next. Next, how I would describe the structure of my input data. It could be very much unstructured, things coming in email formats, or they could be paragraph text within PDFs and documents and forms. However, mine is very much structured. It's very much in that table data in Excel. And click next. And next, am I aware of any changes to the way we currently perform this process? So we may have some major changes expected. It's not that we don't capture that idea, but what we do is maybe we defer it until those changes have been implemented. In my case, there are no changes expected. So let's go ahead and click next. And is there any documentation regarding this process or activity? Well, this is fairly real world, so no, there isn't. I mean, it is a very simple task. People get trained on it in a matter of hours. So, but I will say if idea is approved, I will document. and click next. And finally, who's the process owner for this? Well, in my environment, there's only me, so sadly, I'll assign myself and click next. So I get to review all of my questions. I'm happy with everything, so I'll click submit. And now I get an automation score. 84% is pretty good based on my experience. It's got a high degree of suitability because it's a stable process, it's structured, it's rules-based, and so on. But my readiness is being drawn down because I don't have the documentation for this process. So let's go back to my workspace and let's look at this, go and view this automation profile. Now in here, not only can we crowdsource the ideas, we can also crowdsource the interest. People can upvote, they can follow this idea. So now let's imagine that I'm the process owner for this. I look at this and think, yeah, this is a good idea. It looks like it should be something that's automatable. So I'll go ahead and approve this. So when I do this, it's my responsibility to make sure it's not a duplicate from another idea, that it's a good candidate for automation, and that the information is reliable. So I'm happy with all of that, so I'll approve it. The next thing I say I would do is I would create the documentation for this. So within Automation Hub, we have access to a tool called Task Capture. So if I go ahead and click this, I've already got it downloaded on my computer, so let's go ahead and open Task Capture. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we can document this process. So I have two options. I can create a diagram and then kind of build my process off the back of that, or I can just dive straight into capturing this process. So let's go ahead and do that. And then the Task Capture toolbar appears. So now all I'm going to do is perform my job. And while I do that, we'll see things like the number of actions that have been captured start to increase, and we'll see a thumbnail screenshot of the steps that I'm doing. So all I'm going to do now is just do my job with this expenses application. So let's go and put in the employee number 110, click the lookup, and you can see now I've got 3 actions because I've clicked, typed, and clicked again, and I can see a little thumbnail of my screen. So let's go ahead and in category, let's put in travel again. Let's make up a date, 1st of September, 2020. Let's choose pound sterling as a currency, and let's put in £100 net and £20 VAT. And I'll just put a description in here, contractor expense item, and click submit. And finally, I'll click the clear button. So all I've done is my job. I've just gone through an example of that process. And here you can see it's captured 19 steps. Let me click on stop. And here now I can see a process diagram. Now we could add to this. So if I was using Excel, then I could add another step here. I could add a decision point. I can add an end point here. So we can build a flow diagram if we wanted to, but I'm just going to keep this very simple. Now if I click on this, on the right-hand side, I can see all my screenshots. So if I select one of these, here I can see, for example, that this is where I clicked on the employee number, and I can start to do things like add a title. I can add a description. And I can work my way through all these different screenshots, providing that commentary. And I get to this one, I think, well, here's some sensitive information, so I can just blur that out. So it's not available to anybody. I would work through my document and continue doing all of the annotation. Once I've finished, I can choose export and publish, and I'll publish it back to Automation Hub. So let's give that a few seconds to work through. And let's just go back to Automation Hub and go back. So now I can see here's my task capture document. And if I open that, choose to download, it just downloads it as a zip file. If I look at that now, I can see here I've got my process documentation. I've got my task capture file, and I've also got a diagram of my process. I've also got a UiPath Studio file that the developer will be able to use as well. So let's just take a quick look at that documentation. This is using one of the UiPath templates, but we can use any template and kind of create the ability to edit this or to modify any existing documentation you may have. I just went the wrong way on my Zoom there, but a driver error. So here we can see things like the title that I entered in Automation Hub, the description that I entered. As I scroll down, a lot of this is just boilerplate stuff from our template. Scroll down to where we find some interesting information. Here I can see the number of steps, the number of mouse clicks, the number of keystrokes, how long it took me to do this. So roughly a minute. And as I scroll down, we can then start to see some of those screenshots and the annotations that I made. So here, the first one that I made, and let's go to the one where I did some redaction. Here we go. That information is now blurred out. So a great set of tools to be able to discover processes through process mining, to be able to discover them through crowdsourcing, and to be able to put documentation into the hands of the users and create capacity for automation. And Automation Hub allows us to do much more than that. It allows us to do things like business assessments and much more. But in the interest of time, I know Keith and Simon have got some content they want to go through. So I'm just going to step back into my PowerPoint presentation, and I just want to share some final information with you. We have pricing for process mining, Automation Hub, and task capture. And if you work with T-Impact, they can benefit from some discounting that UiPath provides. So process mining we offer as a bundle, so for roughly £35,000, and that bundle will give you a server license, 20 business user licenses, and 2 developers, and unlimited processes. And that's a change to the way that we've previously been licensing. We used to license on a per process basis, but now this gives you much more flexibility to choose and swap around which processes you're analyzing and discovering through process mining. So when would you use this? Really when you're looking at discovering end-to-end processes. So some of those larger, more complex processes where you want to identify where your business bottlenecks are and how you want to measure, if you want to measure the impact that automation is having on you and your business. With Automation Hub, roughly just under £7,000 for the license for that. This includes cloud hosting on a software as a service model, and is unlimited users. So if you've got an organization of 5 people or 5,000 or 50,000, it's the same price. When would you use this? It's when you want to crowdsource ideas, more at that task level of granularity. And when you want to build, qualify, and assess your automation pipeline in a consistent way. And finally, task capture. The licenses for this are actually included within Automation Hub, so there's no charge for that. Again, unlimited users. And it's a piece of software that is locally installed. So you work with your IT teams to get that onto an application whitelist, or get those guys to install it for them. And when would you use this? When you want to document processes that may be undocumented, or where the documentation isn't automation friendly. You typically do this after the idea is approved, like we saw in my demonstration. And you can use some of those metrics that are in the outputs of that into informing your business case, such as how long does this task take today, and therefore how many transactions, and then you'll start to get a sense of what is a potential return on investment. So again, any questions on that, feel free to put them into the Q&A. What I'd like to do now is hand back to Keith, and we'll continue with the other presenters. I'll stop sharing, Keith. Keith, you're on mute.
Sorry, they moved the mute button around. So, Dean, thanks for that. That was an excellent overview of the tools. And I hope the attendees see how powerful these tools are and how you can apply those right across your organization. I'm going to talk a little bit about approach. My presentation is going to be fairly brief, and then I'm going to hand over to Simon Jones. What I'm going to talk to you about is how process mining benefits your digital transformation program. And I want to talk more about the approach than about the tooling itself. I will allude a little bit to some of the points that Simon's going to pick up in more detail in his presentation. If I can get my button to work. So when you think about transformation, transformation is a journey. You're trying to get from here to there. It seems very straightforward, but the starting point has got a lot of aspects to it, so it can be quite difficult to understand. Your ending point, there could be innumerable impacts from a change that you make in your organization, and a huge amount of time spent in most organizations is dealing with those impacts that weren't planned and understood when they were introduced. So when you think about your starting point, you've got your operations is got innumerable moving parts, and you can categorize them under the headings of your value stream or your process map. And Dean showed with process mining how you could capture that or at least the systematic portions of that via your process mining tool. You've got organizations, so you've got roles, responsibilities, reporting line that you need to consider. You know, so is there a change? Is that going to change responsibilities? Is that going to, and how's that going to affect behaviors of staff as well? You've got performance reporting. So, you know, how do you monitor the performance of staff? How do you monitor performance of your user journeys or your value streams, whichever term you want to use? And of course, all of that is supported and embedded with your systems, your technology services in the data flow. So if you change one of these, it can have a knock-on effect on the others. If you're moving from a current position where you are today to a new position where you want to get to, you need to understand those impacts. So because transformation affects your entire operation, you really need to model these to understand the impacts. The process mining tools gives you a huge step forward and accelerates that modeling. But the most difficult part of the journey is, of course, you've got a great idea, but so do 100 other people in the organization. And how are you going to persuade people that your plan is the best plan? This is very difficult, and it usually requires your argument to support by evidence. You want some numbers to put into a business case. You want some clear evidence that that this is a problem, and that this solution will solve that problem. That evidence is really hard to come by, particularly if you haven't modeled. So with that in mind, if we think about process mining, what it helps us to do is get one of the most important pieces of evidence in your business case, the cost of doing nothing. So what is it costing you today if your process isn't efficient? So Dean pointed out in Dean's presentation, he highlighted loads of waste in this process, loads of rework and errors. What we're striving for when we're looking to streamline and improve process is right first time. We want to avoid errors being introduced into the process, and we want the process to run to a predictable time frame, so we could issue we could have a service level that we could commit to our customers, whether they be internal or external. He also identified some defects that require time and energy to go and fix. Those defects can be managed out of the process. If you have visibility of them, you put solutions in place. Generally, it's about investing at the front end of your process to stop defects coming in. And this data that is just falling out of the tool gives you probably 25% of the modeling work you need already, because you understand all of the system touch points across the process, which gives you a very good visibility of the activities. Of course, there's some non-system activities you need to flesh out as well, but you've got that framework to work with. And with the time that you freed by having this information handed to you on a plate, you can invest that in that persuasion. The other key point I wanted to pull out is prioritization. So Dean gave you a very nicely formatted run through of Automation Hub. We looked at an expense example, but you could apply this to any part of your business. The people who take the time to complete the detail in Automation Hub are invested. So they want to improve the area they're working in. Their pride is out there they've taken pride in their work, and they've demonstrated evidence that they want to make things better. So you already have some change champions you're building up at the front line where it's most important. It enables you to get together your short list of processes for further analysis. And you probably need to go in and have a professional business improvement person or somebody, whether it's internal or external, have a look at what they've suggested, make sure that they answered all the questions correctly, and the score you come out with is a right score. But you know what to look at. You don't have to go out and look at the other hundreds and hundreds of processes and tasks across your organization. You got a short list worth looking at. And it effectively gives you the starting point for your implementation plan. Say you had 40 ideas be submitted by, which is a very reasonable number across your organization. Out of those 40 ideas, you're going to look at the scores, put them all into a process backlog, choose the top 4 or 5 to really focus on, and go in and do the final analysis to decide, and then start working on solutions for them, whether that be robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, workflow, or maybe just some minor changes to the systems you have today. Quite often you can achieve a number of benefits with no technology changes whatsoever, just clarifying roles and responsibilities and potentially giving people the information they need to do their job. So with the prioritization, you're really accelerating decision-making. Your enemy in this is delay and limbo, you know, the over-analysis. It's better to deliver 5 projects that are good than spend 3 or 6 months debating which are the 5 best projects to get started with. So you can identify some really good projects to get started with. You can look at the factors that you should be considering, and you can identify supporters that'll help you with your change journey. So I'd like to leave you with these thoughts. Transformation is a journey. Organizations are complex and they require a model to understand all the moving parts and to understand what impacts you're going to have across the organization operation if you change it. And persuading others is difficult. And your persuasion is going to be much more impactful if you can support that with evidence, and process discovery tool supports these. I'm now going to hand over to Simon Jones, who's going to talk to you about how to win friends and influence people.
Thanks, Keith, and good morning, everybody. So as Keith said, we're building a picture here. Dean has come up with some really powerful tools that can help us in terms of identifying where we need to go on the change journey and how we can persuade people. And Keith has stepped back a bit further about how that journey is going to work. And I'm going to take a further step back and just talk about the overall change journey. So I suppose the key thing to think about here is, why should we consider change? In every transformation program I've done, the technical bits, the hard tangible bits are the bits that people actually feel most comfortable about and spend most time on. And I would like you to take away from this is, why do we need to think about this in a more holistic sort of way and look at the wider organization? So we need to be clear about why people should go on that change journey. And I would argue that you need to put more effort into the stakeholder management of that journey than the technical delivery. And I think it's always important, because these tools are really powerful, really useful, but we need to realize that however good the technology, it doesn't mean that people are going to use it. So we need to appreciate that change is a really big job, and we can't underestimate that. So hopefully, if we invest in change, especially up front, we're going to make longer term savings later on. So even though we're talking about technology, I think as Dean and Keith have talked about, we're really talking about people. And when we think about change, I think about it as developing personal capability and organizational awareness, so that personal capability can be deployed to deliver value. And that's about thinking about, what do people need to do? So your heads, making sure that they are bought into it with their hearts, and understanding exactly what that's going to mean for different people across the organization and what they're going to need to do differently in terms of their hands. So at the most conceptual level, it's pretty straightforward. But getting people to think differently and adapt their attitudes to act in new ways and deliver that value is really difficult. And part of the way we need to do that is by defining benefits and the pain. So the benefits and pain of how they're working now and how it could be improved. As we talked about, aligning process, people, and technology. We need to understand the shape of change. How big is it? How many bits of the organization is it going to touch? We need to develop new capabilities so people can behave and work in new ways, carry out activities differently to deliver value, and establish conditions for successful change, making sure that people aren't going to be inhibited in working in new ways by other parts of the organization, and then managing that whole change journey in a holistic, joined up way. So lots of this stuff, the technology is new, but it's as old as human societies, and the problems have been there all the way through, which in some ways is quite depressing, but in other ways is quite reassuring. I suppose the key takeaway is people will react differently at different rates when they're going through that change journey. So it needs to be constantly monitored to do that. So key to doing that is making clear goals for people to be able to follow. And obviously the tools that Dean's been showing and the approach that Keith has described help to do that. And the way we need to think about that slightly is through the use of understanding how we're going to deliver the value. And that's about prioritizing. So value is, as you know, is a ratio of benefits over cost. And this is subjective and relative to other options. Generally, people don't make choices on the basis. They basically do it through triangulating instinct and self-interest. So these tools are great about bringing evidence. But when you go and ask people what needs to happen, there's going to be a range of responses. So there's going to be some things that need to be done. And rather dramatically, I describe that: without this, you'll die. So these could be health and safety, personal safety issues, but they could be reputational issues for the organization. Individually, if you go and ask people what they want, they will come up with a whole list of things. And as Henry Ford said, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So there's also things that need to be offset around expectations, which are social things. And those could be to do with things like inclusion or allowing people that begin to mitigate or decide or shape what the demand is that you're going to deliver. So demand is prioritizing the benefits and the requirements to deliver those benefits and offsetting that by the cost through your business case in terms of what that's going to be. And there's some key questions under there that you could use to help beginning to shape that demand management. So the value will shape the demand, that will shape your service design, how you're going to change your service, and it will provide you with your clear goals. And for getting the buy-in of people to do that, goals are really important. You need support of people across the organization, not those to do with the particular processes or business function necessarily. And those need to be, you want those people engaged so that they're capable, know what to do and how to do it and want to do it. They're committed to the change. They're going to contribute to the success. So they're loyal and productive and putting in discretionary effort. You want them to support it, so they're actually going to see it through the whole change journey. And you want them to be concerned, so they're embodying the ethics of the organization or what needs to be done. And you want them to collaborate, so that they make sure that this is more than the sum of the parts and you're delivering the benefits that you set out to do. So the nature of the demand will shape the service and the change journey. And when you're measuring that, you need to measure it for each of the different user types and segments that's going to be affected. So the different customers and how that's going to affect them and deliver the value to understand the service value. So how do we do this? So behavior is one indicator of change, but it's a kind of a lag indicator and it's difficult to see. So stories are another way of understanding where people are on this change journey. There's lots of methods out there, Six Sigma, waterfall, etc., about and agile, about how you can manage that. But at a high human level, it's about understanding what people are talking about. So we're gossipy as humans. We tell stories, we talk around things, we talk outside meetings, and we do that to understand what's going on. And what we're hoping to do is getting people to tell stories around how they're going to deliver value in new ways. And to do that, you need to understand your goals for value, and that's about establishing an ambition. So that's the heads. And from that, you need to understand the impact of that ambition in terms of the change readiness of people. So what is it they're going to have to do differently? And there's some things under there that can help drive that. And then finally, you need to make sure that they're committed to that change. So it's appreciate their appetite for change. So that's their hearts. And really part of managing this change journey is making sure there's alignment across each of those three factors and understanding how you need to bridge the gap between them. And the arrows there show that this is a constant learning loop, as we said right at the beginning, and we just need to make sure that that the engagement is carried out throughout the change journey. So change resistance, I would argue, is about ambivalence. What do I mean by that? Well, it's diverging stories. So luckily we're not on video at the moment, but you might, if my doctor was here, they might say, Simon, you need to lose some weight and get fitter. Stop eating donuts and drinking so much. I wouldn't be able to argue with that rationally. I would probably sit there and nod and say, yes, I'm going to go off and do it. But probably I'm telling a different story in my head about the only time I feel happy is when I'm eating donuts, and the only time I feel relaxed is when I'm having a drink. So that's what I mean by ambivalence. It's about teasing out those stories and beginning to shape those stories through dialogue and engagement. So what does change success? Well, it's about getting stories about the ambition to be positive, so people aren't saying, oh, that will never work. It's about making sure they have the appetite for that change and that the readiness for that specified change is there. So you can sit there and say, yes, this is how we're going to develop our people to be able to work in new ways, or this is how we're going to engage with them. So all of the different change approaches, agile, whatever, have certain characteristics. And this is the bit where we're going back to saying that this is as old as human societies, as human society. So I'm going to just take an example from Aristotle from 2,500 years ago, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see that the tools that Dean has shared begin to help give you authority. They help you to show that you've got a logical argument. And it gives you the opportunity to go in and understand different audiences. But there's other softer stuff that you need about understanding when you need to engage people and at the right time. And as we said, all of this change is about persuading people to be open to learning and to make decisions to do that so that they can deliver value in new ways. So just in conclusion, I hope that begins to say why we need to put at least as much, well, I'd probably say 4 times as much effort into the engagement of people around that transformation journey. And part of that is getting to understand what that means for different users about why they should be on that journey. It's important that you focus on that on the soft people side as much as the technical delivery, and realize that however good the technology, I'm sure you've all experienced it, it doesn't mean people will use it. And to appreciate it's a really big job and that we shouldn't underestimate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Some great presentations, very informative, so really appreciate that. So we've got a few questions that are being asked, so we're a little bit short on time. So I'm going to dive straight in. So the first question I've got here, I'm going to pose to Keith. Question is, we've got lots of ideas for RPA, but how do we decide which ones we should look at first?
That's a good question. Thanks for fielding it to me, Paul. When you're looking at potentials for any technology, you need to consider 4 things. Is this technology suitable for the problem you're trying to solve or the outcomes you're trying to achieve? How complex is it? If this is the first time you're introducing technology, you want those quick wins to start to build support, because there's always a bit of suspicion about anything new coming into an organization. It may not work here. Is that really going to work? So you want to look at the complexity. You want to look at the appetite for change. As Dean was pointing out in one of his slides, and as Simon mentioned, you can have change overload within a team. If they're already replacing a system, trying to shove in a new project at the same time, it's be unlikely to get any resources for it. And then finally, you need to look at the return on investment. How much is it going to cost, and how many benefits can you identify, both quantified, that you can say, hey, this will impact the profit and loss, or unquantified, such as this will help our net promoter score, but we don't have the tools to achieve that. So that's suitability, complexity, change appetite, return on investment. Here at T-Impact, we've got an approach called an organizational assessment, where we can run a one-day workshop to look through, to create for you a backlog of processes. Take the first 3 of those, do a shallow dive to really understand your process, and give a indicative cost and returns, so that you come out of this one-day investment with a business case and a backlog ready for your implementation plan.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you. Very comprehensive. Thank you. I've got another question here. It's based around automation hub. So, Dean, I'm going to pose this one to you, if I may.
Yeah.
The question is, can we add our own questions to automation hub?
Absolutely, you can. Yes, that's a good question, because we didn't do an end-to-end demonstration, because we wanted to make sure that the messages from Keith and Simon were kind of delivered as well. But the first 9 questions are fixed. They're in the tool. They're there to get consistency in capturing the ideas. But some of the later stages you go through, particularly around the assessment, you can add in your own questions. And in fact, I've done that in my demonstrations. We just didn't get that far through the demonstration that I would often do with customers. And some of the questions that I often see customers putting in there themselves are usually around kind of data governance, data privacy, GDPR, security. So, things like, does this process include personal sensitive information or personally identifiable information? So adding in those kind of custom questions into the tool is very straightforward. In fact, there's an area of configuration where we do that, and you don't need any skills to do it. It's literally kind of show you where you do that, and then you fill your boots in all the different questions you want to ask. What I would caution is that you try to think about questions that would be consistent across your organization and wouldn't be very HR specific or very finance specific. Try to think about things that would be a catch-all for most parts of the organization. But yes, you can add your own questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Dean. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. Next question up is it's a really broad question. So this one's in your area of speciality, Simon. As I said, it's a very broad question. How do you manage change?
Well, I think that's a good, and you're right, a big question. Change is always difficult in terms of trying to pin it down to neat things. At the outset of a transformation journey, just getting that senior buy-in and leadership through engaging and getting that dialogue is really important. So the number of times that we've gone in and identified real opportunities in organizations at a kind of operational level for making big changes that for whatever reason, whether that's at a more senior level, emotional resistance to it, or it could undermine someone's authority or position, means that you probably need to spend a lot of time talking to senior level to line these things up. So lead-in time is big. And then when you carry on further on the change journey, you're transitioning across, the change is managed through things, obviously through the project management, as you do that, and making sure that you've got the governance in place and people having the right discussions and making decisions in a timely manner. But then through the communications, formal communications, and the training and development that you do. And obviously, with the tools that Dean was showing, that provides you real evidence to go back in terms of that performance management and make it happen. So generally, I feel that the way that you help reinforce change is to make consequences for the behaviours and what people are doing.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Simon. Thank you. And I'm going to just move the order of questions around. So we're getting quite a few coming in. We have Trevor on the call, on the webinar as well. Hi, Trevor. Trevor's our head of sales. And I've got one for Trevor here. Trevor, what the average cost of taking an automation program from start to finish?
It's a very difficult one. It depends on the project itself, but what we're looking at is what we've seen today is the start of the process in terms of the discovery and onboarding the journey with automation for yourselves. But if we start with some of our clients, it can start from about from the beginning to end, sort of from 30 to 100K, depending on what they're going to be doing and the tools that they're going to take during that process. But what we try and achieve during this process, as Keith mentioned earlier on in the organisational assessment, is to achieve a very fast return on investment on the initial processes. And when you look at the investment that goes into the robots, those robots can handle more than one task. So you must be aware of that when you do make the investment into the bots themselves, you can get them to handle more than one process. Not concurrently, but they do handle these processes very quickly, and therefore they can be deployed in such a way that you can schedule those processes to be undertaken over a period of time.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got quite a few questions. Unfortunately, we won't be able to answer all of them, but I've just had another one come in. So where have you made the biggest, and I'm going to put this out to perhaps Trevor and Keith, but to the whole panel actually with Dean as well. Where have you made the biggest difference for local government or health clients? What are the opportunities, and does COVID-19 change anything about those opportunities?
Could I start with that, Trevor?
Yes, certainly, yeah.
I'll start with the second half of that around COVID-19, because we've been talking to customers about this quite a bit. We all know that there's a huge number of staff that have been furloughed, and we know that furlough is going to end. The demand on local councils is going to reach a peak when that happens. So I think COVID-19 is a real opportunity to prevent a huge backlog from building up at the councils. If nothing else, just getting all the requests from multiple channels onto system so that your team can deal with it, but more optimally, actually dealing with probably 80% of the requests that come through, which is typically the first or second iteration of a robotic project. Areas where we see the biggest benefits: revenue and benefits, housing, finance, come to the loads of projects we've done in that area. Environment and social, environmental services, another area. Environmental services requires quite specialist tasks, quite specialist skills. And several of our customers have told us they've had open positions in those departments for 4 or 5 years, just can't get the staff. So one thing we've been able to do for Quorum Council, for example, is design a solution that automates a lot of the mundane work and frees up 600, 700 hours for the staff that are there already, and thus reducing the number of staff they need. Sorry, Trevor, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to also mention that certainly in the local authority arena and in other areas as well, we're getting into a phase where we've developed quite a lot of processes, and those processes can be reused. So we're actually pre-configured processes that we're offering now to the councils, where it's going to seriously benefit them, where the investment, a lot of the investment's already been made, and therefore they can benefit from that investment and get a higher return on investment over a much quicker time. And I think Paul was going to share a slide with you in terms of where we can start on that process. So we're working with UiPath. We're also working with partners like AWS to deliver a completely boxed in solution that's going to benefit you over a period of time. So you could take 2 or 3 of these processes up front and find it very valuable to you as an organisation. Check that the return on investment is available to you before you can turn it into production. I'll hand over to you, Paul, sorry.
Thank you. I think Simon would like to add something very quickly.
Yeah, just very quickly. One area where we found this is in licensing in local government. And it really impacts in COVID-19, particularly around private rented sector licensing. So obviously with houses of multiple occupancy, the most vulnerable people in society are packed together, and this really impacts on it. But having robots really streamlines the process and means that councils can go in there and make a big difference on the ground to some of the most vulnerable residents. And we've identified with T-Impact a number of areas across the licensing scheme where that can really help and automate things, and also in terms of remote working, free up staff to do some of the more valuable stuff around enforcement.
I think just to add to that, Simon, I absolutely agree with that. And obviously we've been partners in that world for quite some time now. I think because the question did include health as well. and we are doing more and more work in the kind of commercial health aspect, which of course at every level of health provision is so critical at the moment. I think it will be a area of interest going forward. I don't think it will recede, and I think we'll start to see some innovation coming through in that part of the world as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, we didn't get a chance to announce that was Jane Barrett from Cadence Innova.
Hello.
Yeah. Final thing I'd like to add, Trevor mentioned the bundled offer which we have on the screen. You can see on the face of it there that we're in partnership with Cadence Innova as well. So we mentioned UiPath and AWS, but it's bringing the best of 4 distinct experts in their field so that we can deliver prepackaged solutions that can be implemented quickly and effectively.
Absolutely. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Jane, as well. Unfortunately, we've run out of time now, which is a little bit frustrating. We've got quite a few more questions. We will be sending out slide packs and the recording of the webinar as well. And just to pick up on the point that Keith made about the special offer, just to sort of pick that back up. Here at Impact, we've had some really great opportunities to work with a lot of councils and healthcare organisations. We've delivered some fantastic projects as well, providing great ROI. So as a special offer to all attendees, we can do a special deal on the pre-configured robots, as you can probably see there on the slides. But that price there does mean you'd already require a UiPath license. So what I'd recommend, I'm just very conscious of time, is that when you receive the copy of the webinar and the details, you'll have our contact details. We can take this offline, but if you're really interested in learning more, finding out what we've done for other councils and health authorities, etc., we can set up a call, set up a session, and we can just discuss your actual and specific needs in finer detail so you can really take advantage of these great technologies. So to wrap up, I'd like to thank everybody for attending. Hope you found it really, really useful. A big thank you to our panelists and great presentations there. And hope to hear from you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Great day, everyone.
Bye.